So far, Cage has trained the last Chancers. In this iteration, they didn't have any like super high tech space training center or anything like that. They had like a series of ropes and pulleys that helped them out. One of my favorite characters was in the last chapter, Kelth. He's a fun guy. He's a navigator. He was trying to explain to Cage what it means to like look into the warp, and he was unsuccessful. Cage is ultimately a meathead, and that's the thing about him is it's becoming established that he is a psyker. But what keeps him grounded is he doesn't really know what to do about that. He doesn't know exactly what to do about that. He has prescience, and so that I had said earlier that he just has like the ability to stay alive, and that's his whole thing is he has plot armor. But his plot armor is held together by prescience. And Cage is possessed. He is possessed by a demon. At this point in the book, I think he has had 3 or 4 episodes now, and it gets worse for him. It absolutely gets worse for him. The thing about the thing about the possession is it's not all that different than what happens to him in the second Last Chancers. It's not altogether that different because he's like freaking out from battle psychosis. I think that's what they call it. The camera cannot detect the smoke. That's so weird. It's smoking on my end, but not. There we go. Something that I've noticed. It seems like Kelth. It's easier for me to emulate him when he's on the ship, when he's in his zone. But for the rest of the book, him and Erasmus, it's difficult for me to kind of keep up with them. But I guess that's character development. I guess you see them out of their element. Without further ado, well, you're bloody well up a bargain tree without a knife, aren't you? Says the lieutenant of the Armageddon Orc Hunter platoon, after the colonel has explained how he ended up on their patrol route. He says a few words to his platoon sergeant, and a few minutes later, we're passing around their spare water canteens and scoffing down the rations offered. We're sitting about a kilometer away from where they met us, with the platoon's first squad spread out in a defensive cordon around us. The lieutenant, Golder Friend, is the one who had climbed down the tree to get the jump on me. He's a big guy, a little taller than me, and muscled like an ogren. He's handsome in a rugged, scarred sort of way, and always ready to use his smile. You did bloody well to get this far. I'll give you that, he says, with an appreciative nod. You were right, Colonel. To head this way, it's another 120 kilometers further than you thought it was. And this sector is teeming with bloody orcs. Hundreds of them, in fact. Nice lair you had there as well. It didn't stop you finding us easily, said Brownie, tearing off a chunk of salted meat and chewing heavily. We might as well have stood in the open with signs on our backs, shouting at the tops of our lungs. That's just your bad luck, actually, says the platoon sergeant, an older, heavy-set man named Thorne. That's one of our regular observation posts. Finn's right. If we hadn't been heading for it anyways, we would have walked straight past. Our poor sniper, Daffer, had to sit there all night watching you. We're on our way back to Cerberus as it happens, says Finn. We have to finish our sweep first, but we'll be back there by dawn. You're welcome to be part of the company. The colonel looks dubious. We need proper supplies as soon as we can get them, he says. I think we might be a bit of a hindrance in our current state. We'll be stopping by one of our caches anyway, says Thorne, with a glance at his lieutenant. You can arm up there for the duration. It's about 3 kilometers from here. We'll be there by first light. You patrol by night? Asks Kindrug. Isn't that dangerous? It is for the orcs, laughs Finn. They still haven't learned not to use light fires. We can see them kilometers off. Anyways, I do strongly suggest you come with us tomorrow. Strongly suggest? Says the colonel, during the full force of his stare on the Armageddon officer. Finn shrugs it off without batting an eyelid. Well, actually, I insist, he says. There's all kinds of traps and tripwires as soon as you get near Cerberus, and I can't spare one of my men as a guide. Plus, I wouldn't have it on my conscience if you didn't make it. Think of it as welcome hospitality. We sit in silence for a while as the colonel chews this over. It's Ohebs who speaks up, his voice the barest whisper. I notice your platoon doesn't have a commissar, he says, looking around. They tend to have accidents in the jungle, says Thorne, glancing around at the rest of the command squad, who give knowing nods. Their greatcoats aren't good for jungle work, says one of them, with a comm set strapped to his back. Too ready to push in when you should be falling back, adds another, slowly sharpening his long hunting knife on a whetstone. Gotta be nice and careful out here. Nice and quiet. Like, no good running around bellowing orders when you've got an ambush set up, is it? Most of them stay at Cerberus, explains Finn. Those that venture out here tend not to come back, I'm afraid. Sometimes they're even got by the orcs, mutters one of the men, and they stifle laughs. Finn scowls. The lieutenant glances at the colonel. Don't listen to them, he says with a dismissive wave of his hand. I'm well aware of the reputation of jungle fighters like yourselves, says the colonel heavily. When do we move out? Finn checks the chronometer from his webbing. Oh, about another hour or so, he says. I'll send out the first patrol in a few minutes, and we'll see what they have to say. Good. I shuffle off and find a boulder to use as a pillow, folding my fatigue jacket over and curling it up. There are 35 guardsmen who grew up in these jungles out there, and they've been fighting the orcs for over 50 years, ever since Gazgul's first invasion. Sleep comes easily when you feel safer than you've done in years. It's happened a couple times now. There's like, in the second book, they fight a guy who's not Commander Farsight. And then in this book, they find Catachans, but they're not Catachans. I think that in this very I wouldn't call it Old Hammer, but I think this is Middle Hammer. I think in this Middle Hammer, I just see the infancy still of really a lot of 40K, and I feel like Mr. Thorpe here is suggesting that mainly these are archetypes, all right? There are multiple Tau renegades. I mean, he directly mentions Farsight in the Second Last Chancer's book, but they kill a guy who's basically just Farsight. And right now they ran into Catachans that weren't Catachans. But yeah, I feel strongly, very directly, that he's suggesting here that even these special characters are just archetypes for something else. And the main thing about a special character is you can only have one of them ever on the battlefield. A lot of the Warhammer lore, I think, is decided in those codexes. First Light gives us a better look at our new companions. Like Finn and Thorn, they're all well built, raised from the hardy stock of many generations that have lived in these savage conditions. They're almost as barbaric as the aliens they're fighting. Dawn reveals necklaces and ear piercings of orc fangs and heavy green tattoos beneath the camouflage. Finn himself has the lower jawbone of an orc strapped beneath his helmet along the chin strap. I didn't see it last night because he'd left it on his pack. They certainly seem raring to go, which is more than can be said for the last chancers. I kick Kindrug awake and send him to rouse the others. Moaning and stretching, they assemble around the colonel as he waits for the signal from Finn. It's then that I notice someone is missing. Where's Spooge? I say, looking around the encampment. I think he's talking to one of the squads, says Kelth, picking at the tattered threads of his robe. Something about his skull. For Emperor's sake, I say, and I'm about to send Brownie to look for him when I notice him clawing his way up the bank towards us, servo skull under one arm. No fixers? Says Laurie, seeing the little man cradling the quill skull. He just shakes his head sadly and looks at Finn. Do you have tech priests at Cerberus? Erasmus asks, hope suddenly returning to his face. A few, the lieutenant replies. Spooge nods happily to himself. Let's move out. After a short while, we're at their supply cache, hidden in a cave between two tumbled boulders, a fallen log concealing the entrance. Inside are several packs full of water and rations, as well as ammo crates, spare auto guns, heavy stubber barrels, and power packs. The platoon begins to gear up properly, and Finn invites us to join him. I snatch myself an auto gun with 5 mags of ammo. And while I'm at it, I snaffle a couple of frag grenades. Laurie passes out water bottles, which we thirstily drink from, having only a few mouthfuls since we crashed down. We spent the next few minutes checking magazines, finishing off part full water bottles to avoid them making noise, all that kind of stuff. After a few minutes, Finn gives us the nod, and we move out again. With one squad out ahead and one out to each flank, we march off, keeping a steady pace. The colonel splits us into 2 groups, Kelth and Spooge under the watchful eye of Kindrug and Ohebs, while the rest of us accompany Finn's command squad. A couple of hours in, Finn signals a halt. From up ahead, one of the scouts emerges from the jungle, moving at a fast jog. We've got an orc sign, about 3 kilometers ahead, the orc hunter reports. A large group, perhaps 40 or 50 of them. Headed west like the last ones? Asks Thorn. Leaning down beside Finn, the scout nods. All right, assemble the platoon, says Finn. Squad 1, to stay on scout and follow the trail. Squad 2, move ahead and set up an ambush a couple of kilometers ahead of them. Squad 3 is reserve. I'll provide a rear group backup and a second reserve. I like the way Finn includes himself with the platoon. Not at all like the sort of lieutenants that I've known. There's very little ceremony. Something else I've noticed with a lot of the wilderness-based regiments. I guess they realize that getting it right on the battlefield is more important than signing buttons and sharp salutes. Than shining buttons and sharp salutes. On top of that, these guys have been fighting together for years now. I can vaguely remember that kind of bond When you know you can't trust the guy next to you, not to spit in your coffee. But when the bullets and las bolts start flying, he'll be watching your back because he knows you're the one watching his. And the squad sergeants begin to filter back through the brush. Finn briefs each of them in turn, giving them precise instructions and checking that they understand. A few ask questions about positions and timing. It's all very relaxed, but without being careless or casual. Thorn stands up and walks over to us, where we're sitting on the edge of a narrow stream, having a quick break. You'll be staying with us, secondary line, he says, looking at the colonel to see if he has any objection. Schaefer just nods in agreement. When Finn gives the signal, we'll close up with the front squads and provide support. He nods to the other members of the command squad. One of them has a 25mm heavy stubber across his shoulders. The other two are stripping down and oiling their heavy bolters. Wow. So, okay, there's 5 command squad members, or there's 3 command squad members. In that command squad, they have a heavy stubber and 2 heavy bolters. That is an impressive amount of firepower just for one command squad. That that's like those are heavy weapons teams. How come you guys use autoguns instead of las guns? Asks Lori. Surely las guns are more practical for extended patrols. What with being able to recharge the packs? Thorne smiles. The black and green camouflage twists across his face, his bright teeth showing. It's a platoon by platoon thing, he says, pulling his autogun off his shoulder and patting it. Carrying ammo can be a bitch, you're right. But we don't mind trading that hardship for the added psychological effect. Psychological effect? Asks Brownie. I notice with a smile that he's managed to find a heavy stubber for himself. He has ammo belts looped over his shoulder and spare shells thrust into pouches in his belt. So yeah, that was one thing. I think what they're talking about right now is in the Imperial Guardsman's uplifting primer, which I can get. I mean, it's in my room. It says that you can recharge a lasgun power pack by exposing it to flame. But the problem with that though, the problem with that though is it greatly reduces the life of the power pack. Okay. Okay. It would be pretty badass to be a last chancer, but yeah, I wouldn't want to do it. I guess thinking about the last chancers makes the Imperial Guard not seem so bad. A couple of hours in, Finn signals a halt. From up ahead, one of the scouts emerges from the jungle, moving at a fast jog. We've got an orc sign about 3 kilometers ahead, the orc hunter reports. A large group, perhaps 40 or 50 of them. Headed west like the last ones? Asks Thorn. Leaning down beside Finn, the scout nods. All right, assemble the platoon, says Finn. Squad 1, to stay on scout and follow the trail. Squad 2 move ahead and set up an ambush a couple of kilometers ahead of them. Squad 3 is a reserve. I'll provide regroup and backup. Oh, yeah, they were talking about the psychological effect. You have to understand how an orc thinks to fight him properly, says Thorn, getting serious. Autoguns make a lot of noise and bright muzzle flare, and that's something they can respect. There are not many things the orcs are scared of, but you can be sure we're one of them. When the platoon lets rip with these beauties from hiding, the air is filled with hot metal, and it's an almighty din, especially at night, when we usually operate. Orcs don't care about the pissy little zip zip zap of las guns. It just doesn't register as proper weapons fire for them. Way to fire connects. Way to fire counts for a lot too, adds Finn. And we glance up, not noticing that the sergeants have dispersed, and he's joined us. He moves so damn quietly all the time, despite his bulk. When you're lying down, fire into the bush, you're not looking for precision, aim shots. Hell, that's why we got snipers in each platoon. And when one of them big green uglies is legging straight at you, you don't want to put as much fire. You want to put as much fire into him as possible, because it don't matter whether you shoot him in the leg, head, or chest. Most of the time, makes sense to me. Finn makes it clear that it's time to head out, so we grab our gear and file off behind him. About 30 minutes later, and even I can see where the orcs have been. The undergrowth is trampled flat, and there are hundreds of boot marks in the mud, overlapping with each other. Finn falls back to walk beside us. These are from the seconders, he says, seeing our perplexed expressions at the term. He explains. Firsters are the orcs that came down or descended from the first invasion 50 years ago. They've gone very feral, but they're heaps more jungle-wise than the ones we're following. Their weapons might be cruder, but their cunning is a fox rat, and almost impossible to find. So these orcs are newly arrived, says the colonel, looking ahead through the trees as if he could see them. Yeah, it's a worry, really, says Finn. We've come across more and more of them on the patrol. At least 4 groups, all heading west or north. This is the only one I've been close enough to follow. There's the distant crackle of fire from up ahead. Finn doesn't seem the least bit concerned. He is marching along and chatting quietly with the colonel. The rest of the squad are similarly relaxed. I can feel my heart beating faster in my chest. I tighten my grip with the autogun, checking again to make sure that the safety's off. Erasmus! I call out to the scribe, who's just ahead of me. He turns and stops, waiting for me to catch up. I nod to Brownie. Go and act as a loader for Dunmore. You want me to help him? He says, staring at me in disbelief. In combat? You're an armorer. You know how the 25 mil works, don't you? I tell him. He nods. Well, go and tell Brownie that I've assigned you as a loader. Spooge jogs off, casting another worried glance back at me. Then he joins Brownie. They exchange a few words, and Brownie looks over in my direction, and then heads towards me. What's your game, mate? He says through clenched teeth. Why are you dumping that useless fat bowl on me? Because he's better off doing that than firing a gun, I say, not looking at Dunmore. Better to have him loading for you than a soldier who could be putting down fire. I can almost hear gears in his brain trying to work out a flaw in my logic, but he doesn't come up with anything, so he simply scowls and stalks off. I check the safeties off on the autogun again, and out of the corner of my eye I see the trooper with the comm set, holding the headpiece to his ear, listening. He gestures to Finn, who jogs over and listens to the relayed message. The lieutenant looks in our direction and then jogs over to us. He points to a fallen tree alongside the orc trails about 20 meters away. Set up a position around there, he says, looking at the colonel. He gives Schaefer the order as if he was one of the platoon. He turns around and points behind us, opposite of the fallen tree. That's the area of engagement. No firing anywhere else. Orcs have pulled back from the ambush. Squad 1 will be following them, and we'll be on the diagonals to catch them. I don't want any stray shots catching our own guys. He turns to walk away and then changes his mind. I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, but I will anyway, Finn says, looking at each of us. His normally smiling face deadly serious. Nobody opens fire until we spring the trap. You mess this one up, and you're walking to Cerberus on your own. I expect the colonel to reply, but he just stands there, unclipping the cover on his holster, and he looks at me. You have your orders, Kage, Schaefer says, turning his back on Finn as the Armageddon officer walks away. Detail fire teams to cover our position, and make sure you have someone covering our rear. I nod and start snapping out orders to the last chancers, pointing to various hiding places and vantage points in the area assigned to us. They break apart, heading to their individual places, leaving me with the colonel and Kelf. I look at the navigator. What am I going to do with you? I say. I will find myself a safe refuge, he says, looking around. Perhaps with Lieutenant Finn? Everyone fights, says the colonel, pointing to the las pistol hung on his belt, taken from the orc hunter's cache earlier the morning. Not me, Kelth says, shaking his head slightly. Eyes meeting the colonel's stare. My abilities are too rare to risk in some pointless skirmish. The click of the bolt pistol in Schaefer's hand sounds ridiculously loud, and he brings his arm up, aiming straight at Kelth. Are your abilities too rare to waste getting shot avoiding a pointless skirmish? The colonel asks. His arm is steady as a rock, his icy glare burning into Kelth. The navigator glances at me, looking for some sign that Schaefer's bluffing, and then looks away, seeking Finn or one of his men. They're all out of sight. There's nobody but him and the colonel. This is ridiculous, says Kelv. And it is also a contravention of my charter as a navigator. You are supposed to uphold the law, Colonel, not break it. The colonel's finger curls inside the trigger guard. Under regulations, our escape qualifies as a military crisis, the colonel says. All present are therefore subject to military law. As I said in the Savior capsule, anyone guilty of cowardice will be executed. Kel's look of disbelief turns to resignation, and he pulls the las pistol from his belt. There's a barely audible whine as he presses the charge button. The navigator looks at me. Where would I be most useful, Lieutenant? He asks, eyes narrowed. Stick with me, you'll be fine, I say, leading him away from the colonel to a narrow depression a few meters in front of the fallen log. Brownie and Erasmus have set up the heavy stubber at one end of the log, facing the trail. They are hidden under a clump of ferns in the log itself. There's a loud clank as Dunmore cocks the slide and moves the first round into place. He gives me a thumbs-up signal as I settle down. It's not long before I hear the orcs approaching, the snapping of twigs and rustling of dead leaves underfoot. I can see them now, moving straight back down the trail. Dumb green bastards that they are. I can't tell how many there are, not yet, but my guess will be 24 or so. Glancing to my left, I can't see a trace of Finn and his squad. So well hidden are they, behind rocks, bushes, and in depressions. Not even a single muzzle is in view. There are no sounds from them either, just the gentle wind in the trees above. In contrast, I can hear feet scraping behind me, the click of a safety being released, and a stifled snort. The orcs are coming forward in small groups of threes and fours, hurrying but not rushing headlong toward our position. They stumble along with their characteristic stooped gait, long arms swinging beside their short legs. Their green skin blends in well with the colorful jungle, but their dark clothes, rusting belts, and chains show that they don't hide easily enough. A few of them stop to fire off shots behind them, at the pursuing squad, I guess, or perhaps just at shadows. I don't know. The front group is about 50 meters away, and I can make out their features more clearly. Their leader is at the front. It is larger and more heavy set than the others, with crude metal plates of armor and riveted to its jerkin, a tight helmet on its bucket jawed head. It's snarling something to the others, exposing a ragged row of long fangs, and a jaw powerful enough to crush a man's skull. I know. I've seen them do it. Almost. At 30 meters, all hell breaks loose. The bushes to our left erupt with muzzle flare and the chatter of autoguns. This is swiftly accompanied by the roar of the 25 millimeter opening up. The front orcs go down, and the first concentrated hail of fire. Bloody eruptions, stitching across stomachs and chests, heads blown apart by heavy stubber fire. The heavy bolter opens up with a distinctive rapid booming, each shot hurling a rocket, a little bit bigger than my thumb. The first shot explodes against the tree trunk, hurling back, hurling bark and sap into the air. The gunner adjusts his aim quickly. The second bolt smacks cleanly into the chest of the leader and explodes, tearing the orc boss apart from inside, scattering ripped entrails. Um, it's not really fair to call that orc a boss. I mean, like a boss is like a war boss, right? Like a boss is like the equivalent of a commander or a captain, right? For the orcs. This is a knob. So every orc squad is run by a knob. And that's really the scariest thing about the orc squads is what they do is they just buy time for the knob to get up there and cause havoc. So I guess it's good that they took out the knob so quickly. It's all happened in just a few seconds, and I realized that Brownie's been firing from behind me. The zip of heavy stubber bullets, zinging past a few meters to my right. I pull the autogun around and squeeze the trigger, letting off a 4-shot burst to feel the gun. It's got a bit of a kick. So with my next burst, I aim low at the orc that's been raising its crude gun towards Finn's position. 3 shots rip out, the first missing, but the next 2 stick it in the abdomen. It swings back from the shots, its own gun roaring wildly into the trees. I down it with my third burst, putting a few rounds into his chest and neck. The orcs are running towards Finn's position, not realizing where we are, and I open fire again. A longer burst shatters the kneecaps of another orc, sending it tumbling into the leaves and dirt. It howls and then swings toward us on its belly, its bulky pistol erupting, sending bullets chewing into the dirt a little to my left. Before I can finish it off, Dunmore's heavy bolter chatters again. A line of impacts bursting in front of the orc until the fire interacts with it, gouging lumps out of its face, intersects with it, gouging lumps out of its face and tearing into its shoulders. It slumps down, dead this time, and I pick another target. The trail is littered with orc bodies, half of them already dead. And I realize, with a shock, it's only been about 10 seconds since Finn's group opened fire. Some of the orcs are scattering into the jungle, while a five-strong group, much braver than the rest, charges forward. Brutal cleaver-like knives raised, pistols and guns, hurling metal in all directions, chewing lumps out of the fallen tree just behind me. They're about 10 meters from us, and I'm about to stand up, ready to flee, when there's a burst of fire from behind them. The pursuing squad opens fire, adding to the din of autogun fire, and the three of the orcs go down in the surprise salvo, their backs ruptured and bloody. One of the orcs falters and turns, only to get a heavy bolter shell in the ribs under its half-raised arm, its chest exploding outwards from the detonation. The last hurls itself toward me, bringing its wicked cleaver down in a long arc. I roll to my right, finger on the trigger of the autogun as I throw myself clear. The point-blank fire tears into its left arm and stomach. It grunts and sways, and then steps forward again. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the colonel rise up from the undergrowth to my right, bolt pistol in both hands. He plants the shot straight into the side of the orc's low forehead. Its head disintegrates a moment later. The streaming remnants of an eyeball plop onto my leg as the orc's headless corpse falls across me, kicking it free. I leap to my feet, searching for another target, but the orcs have scattered. I can hear bursts of autogun fire out in the jungle and see the occasional muzzle flash in the gloom as the other two orc hunter squads stalk to the murk, earning their title. Finn stands up from the tangled roots of a tree about 20 meters to my right, slapping another magazine into his autogun and waving for his squad to emerge. He sees the blood and shit all over me and grins. Striding over to me, he slings the firearm over one shoulder on its strap and drags free a combat knife as long as my forearm. Got yourself a couple there, eh, Kage? He says, stooping down and rolling the orc over. He digs in the remnants of the face with the knife, and his bloodied hand emerges a few seconds later, preferring me 4 large tusks. He nods for me to take them, and I hold out my hand. He tips the fang into my palm and steps back. I look at them for a moment, and he laughs, a deep noise, and steps forward to slap me on the shoulder, leaving a bloody handprint. Keep them safe, he says with a smile. You just killed your first orc on Armageddon. There's millions of the ugly green bastards out there for you to get. But always remember that first one. I look down to see the other last chancers being given similar prizes by the rest of Finn's command squad. Erasmus staggers up to me, servo skull under one arm, outstretched hand with a bloody orc tooth thrust towards me. Did I do all right? He says, his stare slightly vacant. I take his fingers and close them around the thing and give him a wink. Welcome to Armageddon, Erasmus, I say. Welcome to the green hail. He smiles, nods slightly, and then faints. Congratulations, Erasmus Spooge. You have entered the realm of character development. I am not sure what I was expecting Cerberus base to look like, but it's nothing like what I have said if you had asked me. I was thinking of some huge armored bastion with towers and ramparts and everything. What I find out as Finn leads us through the gap in the fourth concentric ring of razor wire surrounding the Imperial station is that it's a huge camp, and it looks like a complete mess. The jungle is scorched and ripped up about a kilometer in every direction, craters dotting the landscape. There are wooden watchtowers placed along the razor wire and minefield defenses, and I can see mortar and artillery emplacements dug down into the earth behind the wood reinforced revetments. Here and there, I see a bunker roof, buried beneath sod and leaves, heavy stubber and las cannon muzzles protruding menacingly from their dark interiors. Trenchworks crisscross the whole hill as it rises from the jungle, overlooking the surrounding wilderness for kilometers on all sides. As we pick our way through the traps, receiving waves from hidden snipers and gun post officers, I see a huge bonfire about a half a kilometer to our left, a thick column of black smoke rising into the yellow sky. Out in the open, we're subjugated to the full force of the sun as it beats its way through the permanent low cloud, heating the air like an oven. I'm drowning in sweat after the first few meters, and I can already feel my face burning. Finn looks over at the bonfire, a concerned look on his face. He urges us to hurry on, without giving us a reason, but I collar Thorn and ask him what the blaze is all about. Orc bodies have to be burned, the platoon sergeant says, glancing at the bonfire. Standard practice. Yeah, what's so strange about that? I ask. I've heard that advice given many times before, something to do with orcs reproducing with spores, or some other stupid theory the tech priests have. A fire that size means there must have been a pretty serious attack, Thorne says. We received a recall for defense when we were out on patrol, but Finn figured it wasn't anything too major. I guess we know that all those seconders were going to either come here or flee from here. Set just below the crest of the long hill, at the center of the base, is an armored portal. Its steel gates open. I can see rows of figures coming and going just above it. Comms aerials sprout out of the ground like metal ferns, spreading high into the air, relaying and sending signals to all the patrols across the jungle and to the high command out past the edges of the tree and in orbit. Negotiating another kink in the trail. Through the razor wire, we start heading further uphill, towards the command bunker. As we move on, the other squads peel off to the right, heading for their own digs in a trench further around the hill. Only Finn and his command squad are left with us. It's a blessed relief to walk in through the open gates of the command complex into the shade. Although it's still hot and humid as hell, it's good to be out of the direct heat. And with the change, my sweat suddenly feels icy cold. Suppressing a shiver, I stop for a moment, allowing my eyes to adjust to the gloom. The interior is carved out of the hill itself, and is reinforced in places with metal plates and spares. Corridors and rooms lead up, down, left, and right. It's a total rat's nest, and my experienced eye notices some of the little details, such as loopholes in the walls, covering the entrance so that any attacker can be fired on through the walls. Looking up, I see that as well, the main gates themselves, there are two more blast doors ready to be dropped down across the accessway. It'd be hard to imagine any enemy getting that far. More Orc Hunter squads are heading out, giving nods and waves to Finn and his men, and casting interested glances at us. A few tech priests scurry around, and Erasmus tries to attract the attention of one, but he is ignored as the red robed adept of the machine god drifts past. There are a few officers floating around, chatting to each other, looking at maps as they walk, or carrying steaming mugs. It's all quite civilized, really, considering there are thousands of orcs out in the jungle, all of them intent on wiping this place out from existence. There are a few secondary camps further north and south, says Finn. It's the first thing he said since we came in sight of Cerberus. They used to be training bases, but of course, you can get all the training you need these days, just as days march in the jungle. We also used to have another major base in the northeast, Wolf Outpost. The orcs almost overran it until the commander blew the self destruct. You might have seen the remains actually. Made a hell of a mess for 20 kilometers in every direction. Well, that explains a lot. As we walk down the tunnels, turning left and right, seemingly doubling back on occasion, Finn gives us a running commentary. The main comms room, buzzing with equipment, low chattering voices, and radio static, opens up on our left. The hall down the main armory leads away a little further on. Steps wind up to the artillery and observation posts, and are dotted at regular intervals along our route, along with officers' mess rooms, kitchens, cells, storerooms, and all the other assorted junk you'd find in any Imperial military base. We've been walking about 10 minutes when I realize how far we've gone. Just how big is this place? I ask Finn, my voice loud in the confined space. It goes through the entire hill, which is a few tertiary corridors out in the jungle itself, he says. They've been sealed. The only way in or out now is through the main gates. It's hard to defend that many entrances. We've learned that in the first few days after the second invasion. By the expression on Finn's face, I know not to ask more. I can imagine what brutal fighting must have occurred when the orcs got inside. Fighting at close quarters, where they're at their best. We are here, says Finn, leading us through an open doorway to the right. Inside the command hub, an open room with a large table emblazoned with the Imperial Eagle at the center, and a huge map hung on the wall. There are red and blue scrolls all over the chart, and there's a handful of officers moving back and forth in front of it, updating the annotations and making cryptic remarks as they refer to scribbled notes on the pads they carry. Through another doorway, we walk into the real nerve center with comms panels all around the walls, linked to the various other stations on the hill, I guess. Monitor servitors and lex mechanics churn out data from the incoming flow, scribbling the intelligence on long reams of parchment that spill to the floor. Every now and then, a map officer walks back in, tears free a strip, and goes back to update the map again. At the far end, stirring on what can only be described as a metal throne hooked up with monitors, is a broad man, leaning over, talking to a huddle of tech priests, and a man with the markings of a major on his cap. He looks up as we approach, smooths his thick mustache with a gloved hand, and then slicks back his short, graying hair. Ah, you've decided to come back after all, Lieutenant Fenn, he says, his voice a crackled wheeze. I notice the scars of two puncture marks. You've decided to come back after all. I can't do the Godfather. I was trying. That was my shot. I guess that he's had his fair share of run-ins with the orcs before being cocooned in this command center. I then notice he's not actually sitting on the throne. He is wired to it. He has no legs. The stumps sitting in metallic cups. Out of the corner of my eye, I can see the colonel do his best to straighten his dress coat and brush off the worst of the burrs and scratches inflicted by the jungle trek. Marshal Vine? says the colonel, stepping forward and saluting sharply. Colonel Schaefer, commanding officer of the 13th Penal, sir. Ah, you're the last chances man, aren't you? Says Vine. I'm afraid you'll have to come to me so I can shake your hand, since my bloody chair isn't working. The last words were shouted at a thunderous bellow, directed towards the major and the tech priests, who visibly flinch. The colonel takes a couple of steps forward and takes the preferred hand, giving it a short shake. And then he steps back. Ah, I heard you ran into a spot of trouble, says Vine, wheezing, folding his hands on his lap. Sorry about the welcome, but our intelligence is out of date. All the bloody time. Again, this damning criticism is delivered as a deafening roar, aimed this time at the map officers scurrying back and forth from the other chamber. I see Finn suppressing a smirk. And not soon enough from the hawk-eyed marshal to miss it. Ah, you can stand there and smile all you bloody well like, Finn. Vine shouts, pointing an accusing finger at the lieutenant, his hoarse voice shrill. I'm definitely, if I was the last chancer, I would definitely have a bonk pot. I think it's so useful. But I really feel like a bonk would be pretty tremendous. I might be able to go through a helmet with it, not sure. Just the force of it. I've used this bonk pot to smash in the fire extinguisher thing. It was pretty cool. This lady yelled at me. Later, I learned that she was a bad lady, so I'm really glad I disturbed her day. But yeah, the tactical bonk pot really has a lot of uses. Yeah, if I was the last chancer, I would probably be the food guy. I think that that would mainly be my thing. I'm not even sure if like I would be that much good at fighting, but I would be good at like logistics. I don't think there's a logistics last chancer, so that would be the niche that I feel. Maybe a big ridiculous coat that just has a bunch of just like stupid things. But I want to be more than just a Deus Ex Machina. I think that instead of having like a massive variety of different things, it's just an abundance of just a couple things. Maybe that would be my thing. Because when I was like in the army, like, oh god, MREs are fine for a while, but just the biggest problem with the MREs is just all the calories that are in one bag. So I would bring like I had a whole like tough box of soup, and other perishables and stuff all the time. And then like I had dried seaweed, and the other soldiers they weren't as sophisticated as me. They thought it was gross. So that's how I had like certain snacks that were only for me. But the big thing though, I guess, if I was gonna be a last chancer, then it would be getting like a supply of some sort of like narcotic, like I think they're called low sticks. They're just like death sticks or cigarettes or something. I don't know exactly what they are, but in Gaunt's Ghost, they smoke a lot of them, and so that would be what I would do is get them addicted. But the problem with this, right, is I've seen these schemes work before in the field because soldiers do not manage their money well at all. In the field, there's this scheme, right? Like, yeah, okay, I'll let them. I'll give them a cigarette now, and they'll give me like 5 or 15 or $20 later. But it just doesn't work that way. I've just never seen that work out even slightly to the favor of the guy that loans the cigarette and the money. So I could see how maybe that's why there is no logistics last chancers, no debts accrued or honored within the last chancers. There's nothing. There's no system in play besides just fighting them. Yeah. I'm sure there'd be something cool though. I'm sure there'd be something cool. He would have joined the last chancers because he tries to make it sound like he was a Robin Hood like character that was stealing from the officers and distributing it to the lower mess, but in actuality, um they did it just to get rid of him because he couldn't shut up. Yeah, that sounds great. He thought he was better than everyone. He sounded like he was smarter than everyone else, and so the officers conspired to get rid of him. So he like his flaw was is he just like he could make this connection, but he just shouldn't have because they set him up. And they got rid of a bunch of other people too. Man, no, that's a really tame backstory. That's a really tame, but Ration. Wow, no, yeah, that backstory sucks. I'll work on it. I'll definitely work on that one. This is the tamest Last Chancer's backstory out of any of them. Yeah, that'd be the worst one. I'd be kicked. They'd like. I'd be the only Last Chancer ever to be kicked out of the Last Chancers. Like Schaefer would look at me and be like, "Son, this outfit is not for you. You just aren't cool enough." Then I'd have to like, I don't know, join the Imperial Navy or something. Ah, you hear that, Lieutenant Finn? Says Vine, leaning forward as far as the bindings holding the chair would allow. Do you deny that you did not comply with my orders? My bloody, direct orders? Is that a court martial, sir? Says Finn, stiffening to attention. If so, I think there are procedures to follow and such. The colonel looks at Finn and then studies his glittering eyes. I can see something in them, something he's thinking quickly about. In a in a military crisis, Jurisdiction and enforcement of imperial law reside solely with the commanding officer in charge, says Schaefer. Ah, hear that too, Finn? Wheezes Vine. Bloody well, Judge. An executioner. That's what you're looking at here. So, did you receive my order or not? I can check your signals record, so don't give me any rat shit about crossed wires or anything. I received your signal, sir, says Finn, sighing heavily. He looks at the colonel, eyes narrowing. Ah, and did you drag your sorry arse back here to protect Cerberus against attack, given that I'd issued the call to recall given that I'd issued the recall order to your platoon? Says Vine, his dark eyes glowering at the lieutenant. I did not, sir, says Finn. Ah, then, what am I supposed to do, you daft bastard? Roars Vine, his anger reducing him to a coughing wreck for a few seconds, his voice in a low hiss when he speaks again. Everybody knows you could make captain as quick as piss runs downhill, but I can't play favorites, can I? No, sir, you cannot, Finn says, his voice quiet. I see him take a deep gulp. He really is taking this seriously, but it's just the bawling out. I'm pretty sure of that. Ah, discipline has to be maintained, the marshal continues, scratching at one ear. So, do you want to be flogged, jailed, or shot, you disobedient monkey rat? If I might offer an alternative, Marshal Vine. If I might offer an alternative, Marshal Vine, says the colonel, before Finn can reply. There is an alternative. I look at Finn, who notices my glance. You poor bastard, I think. I just realized what the colonel is going to suggest. With just a look in my eyes and a shake of the head, I try to communicate to Finn that he just go for the flogging. But he has to look back at Marshal Vine when the commander clears his throat. What have you got in mind, Colonel Schaefer? He says, sitting back heavily, causing his support chair to wobble slightly. I glance down at the floor to see that it's on narrow tracks, but one of the drive wheels is hanging off at an odd angle. No wonder he's annoyed with a tech brief if they can't fix something that simple. It is within my power, under special considerations of the Imperial Commissariat of the Penal Legion Commander, to commute any sentence, sir, says the colonel. Ah, so I don't have to flog this worthless idiot then? Says Vine. You have to sentence him first, sir, for the powers to be active, prompts the colonel. Ah, all right then, says the marshal, leaning forward. Golder Finn, Lieutenant First Class, Commanding Officer of the 3rd Platoon, 1st Company, 4th Armageddon Jungle Fighters Regiment, I hereby find you guilty of gross misconduct by order of the insubordination, through deliberate failure to obey a direct order. Vine and Finn look expectantly at Schaefer. He blinks a couple of times, his ice blue eyes regarding them both. He then looks up at Vine. You have to pass sentence, sir. Ah, right. I sentence you. Vine's hand flaps for a moment in mock indecision. Death by firing squad. Yes, I sentence you to the full penalty of imperial law. Oh, frag. If only he'd stuck with the flogging. Now Finn's up to his ears in the brown stuff and sinking quick. The colonel turns smartly towards Finn, eyeing him up and down. Golder Finn, he says. And I know the exact words that are coming next. You are sentenced to death for insubordination, bringing about Gross misconduct. Sentence commuted to penal servitude under the special supervision of Colonel Schaefer, commanding officer of the 13th Penal Legion. Do you accept this new sentence? What? Says Finn, his brain catching up with the colonel's words. I hear a spluttering cough from Vine as he realizes what's happened. Penal servitude? What the hell are you doing, Schaefer? Spits Vine. I need good soldiers, the colonel says, eyeing Finn. Well, you can't have him. He's one of mine, says the marshal. I can't have such a thing. By the laws that you yourself invoked, Finn can come with me or can be put to death, says the colonel. It is a choice you gave him. My credentials with the commissariat are of the highest authority, and I do have the power to remove you from command. You wouldn't dare, says Vine, shaking with anger. We're at bloody war, or didn't you notice? It is for the successful conclusion of this war that I do this, says Schaefer. He will be mine with or without your approval. The association with countermanding an officer of the commissariat will be enough to ruin you. I'm sorry, Vine says, looking at Finn and then looking away. I'm sorry. I take a couple of steps and lean forward to whisper in Finn's ear. Gotcha.